Hi, this is Heather Jerome from heatherjerome.com and from the Sonatas and Partitas.com. This video is a part 3 video about the A minor fugue BWV 1003 for solo violin. Now, if you haven't watched part 1, please do watch it because I kind of laid out the materials that we're going to use to discuss parts 2 and part 3. If you haven't watched part 2, it's not as necessary. We actually discuss some concepts in a slightly more straightforward manner than we will in this video. Part 2 deals with the end of the fugue, so it's not actually sequential, but the way I look at it a lot of times is, Bach has his materials. He uses them to go to this like structural, pivotal landing place where I say the music turns around and comes back, and then he comes back home and he kind of gets there by the scenic route and goes home by the shortcut. So sometimes it's easier to understand the shortcut, and that's part 2. But in part 1, just to very, very quickly summarize, we have the motive, the subject, and what I didn't mention was the counter subject, and that's going to come into effect in this video. And then there was also a motive that I called motive X. Now, the thing about motive X is that the more the fugue goes along, the more the fugue builds, the more, I called it the compositional bravura, like the more sophisticated Bach manner Bach uses to treat this motive. And then finally, the last use of it is like this grand finale exit where he uses it in invertible counterpoint in retrograde. But what I didn't mention was how it's introduced. And it's introduced very inconspicuously. So I want to look at another fugue, the G minor fugue that everybody knows. That's the first subject. Second time. Third time. And now there's a little piece of nothing. And then the fourth, last time. Now, in this fugue, we have the first time, the second time, little piece of nothingness, and then the last time. So that little piece of nothingness is motive X. And people who listen to a lot of fugues, when they hear this, they would never in the world expect what's going to come of it. It just sounds like this little filler thing. So I wanted to mention that in a way it's just as remarkable the way that Bach introduced it as the way it made its flamboyant grand finale. So there we have our materials. Now the other thing that's important to know is that this fugue is built like a concerto fugue. So a concerto has a soloist and an orchestra. The orchestra plays a refrain. In this case, it's the subject. The soloist sounds like he's improvising. And I also compared this fugue to the 5th Brandenburg Concerto, where there are 2 soloists. And our second soloist is none other than motive X. So, what I'd like to do in this video actually is also work at it backwards, just because it's easier to grasp things if you know where they're going. So I'm going to kind of go back to front and then frontwards. The way that I explained it in the other video when he went from that structural landing place to the end was over the long range. Bach went 4-5-1, and to get to this place he also goes 4-5-1. So what I want to start with is to look at how Bach goes from that dominant to our structural landing place. Subject, soloist. It's all just based on figuration and texture. Slurs and the cadence. So it's just a pretty simple passage going from 5-1 with a lot of forward motion. I find it's interesting, that solo passage, where it is very much based on texture, and it is kind of easy to just sort of zone out on it, and then you're pulled back into the action with those 2-note slurs. So now let's look at the passage from the subdominant to the dominant. So we're going 4-5-1 in E minor, so that's A minor to B to E. And so let's look at how we get from A minor to B. Now, leading up to A minor, we were a little bit feeling like we were in the woods, but we are going to arrive to A minor on a nice strong cadence. And then Bach's going to give us a really nice strong mode. We're going to be chugging along, knowing where we're going, and then we're going to get motive X. And this time motive X is going to be in 3-part counterpoint, invertible counterpoint. And after motive X, it's going to build and build. We're going to feel like we know where we're going. Oh, we're going to G major. We're going to arrive at G major, and that cadence is just going to be bowled over. Things are going to tumble and land on that dominant B. So let's have a look. So here's our cadence on A minor. Nice and clear. And now, chugging along. Now motive X in 3 voices. Invertible counterpoint. Music builds. Heading to G. Arriving, but not quite. Paired slurs again. And now we arrive at B. So you can hear all that tumbling, how it's mixed in with all those paired slurs, and how we really arrive at B. Now, the thing about this G cadence that I'd like to explain a little bit is we were really clearly heading there. And then we really clearly landed there. Now, normally in a fugue, when you really hear it clearly heading somewhere, you really clearly land there. What you get is, you get the subject. That's how fugues are built. But here, we just got, and it's like, what? Whoa, where are we going? And so if you can expect these things, when you get these surprises and you kind of get like thrown over, it makes it more exciting. So that is how we've gotten to the dominant that's going to take us to that turning around place. So let's have a look now at how we get basically from the end of video part 1 up until that A minor cadence. Now, in the part 1 video, first of all, I showed Bach's materials, and then there was the soloist that came in. Now, the soloist had quite a nice lengthy part. He basically sounded like he was loosening up his bowing arm. He was playing in barilage bowing, and then he left us with cadencing on E minor. And so he took us from A minor to E minor to the dominant. That was his job. His job was done and he was finished. And then what happened? We got motive X. Now, motive X, the first time we got it, it was just like snuck in there. The second time we got it, it was in a sequence, and then it was in an inverted sequence. Now this time we're going to get motive X in a sequence that actually inverts at every step. And after that, we're going to go to a place where we actually get some nice strong fugal entries in G. And that's going to take us to a solo passage, an extended solo passage that's going to take us to the dominant of A minor. And then to get from the dominant of A minor to A minor, that's where I said we're kind of in the woods. We're going to get some fugal entries. Some of them are going to be inverted, which are really interesting. Actually, they sound great. They're very expressive. And then there's going to be some nice clear ones right side up with the counter subject. And it's going to take us to that nice clear cadence that I mentioned. So let's have a listen to this. Here's motive X. Do you hear how the chromatic line's in the top and now in the bottom? Now in the top. And now in the bottom. And now on our way. Heading to G. With subject entries in G. Now we have the counter subject, and now subjects underneath. Like Bach makes that look so easy, but it's not just a flip of a coin to make a subject and a counter subject that are so easily invertible. And now, well, if you remember at the end of video 1, I explained how normally what happens is the last subject entry is in the bass, but in that introductory passage, Bach couldn't do that because he would have needed that low bass note, and that's the violin's lowest note, so he kind of had to jimmy the subject a little bit. But now, he set himself up so he's doing his entries in G, so he's going to get that lowest note on the violin. He's not going to be beaten by that old problem from before. And now, so we've had our subject, we have the counter subject, we had the counter subject inverted, we've got the subject in the nice low voice, and now what Bach is going to pair it up with is that chromatic line from motive X. And that takes us to another soloist. Now this soloist is going to take us to the dominant of A minor. This is the longest solo passage in the whole fugue. I'm going to just zip through it. Speed. We're about to reach the dominant of A minor, where we'll get some fugal entries inverted and then some more entries the right way around accompanied by the counter subject, and then finally one last entry with the counter subject in the upper voice, and that'll take us to that cadence on A minor. So here we are at the dominant of A minor. Now we're going to get some subject entries inverted. So that's now, can you hear that? It sounds like it's the end of the previous subject, but it's actually, well, it's also the head of the next one. Side up. Counter subject. And the last one. With the counter subject on the top. I mean, now finally the counter subject was given his moment of glory. Like, that's what it was born to do. You know, the quintessential closing formula. And this is that A minor cadence I was mentioning that takes us to the subdominant. Now let's go forward, covering ground we've already covered. Let's go to that dominant and then to E minor. So here we are, chugging along. Motive X. 3 voices. Tension mouse. Heading true. G, bud. Side swipe. All those 2-note slurs. Cadence on B, the dominant. And now we get the subject. With an elongated tail. And the soloist. Slurs again, and the cadence. now since this was all done in 3 videos and the sequencing was a little bit jumping around back and forth, let's just do a very quick summary. So we start off, Bach gives us his materials. He has his subject, a counter subject. He just sneaks in motive X, and then motive X comes in a sequence. It comes in an inverted sequence. And then one more time before the end of this expository area, Bach will give us the subject in the bass voice. He can't quite get the whole thing there, so he jimmies it around a bit, and cadence is on A minor. Then the soloist comes in. They loosen up their bowing arm. They basically play a lot of barré large bowing, and they take us to the key of E minor. Motive X comes back and takes us to an area where we are going to get some fugal entries in G. We get full entries complete with the counter subject. We're shown that the counter subject can invert, and then we do get the subject in the bass where it belongs at its last entry, and that is taking us to another extended solo passage that takes us to the dominant of A minor. From there we get some fugal entries that cadence nice and strongly on A minor, and now we are on the subdominant, and at the beginning of the passage that's taking us to that main focal pivotal moment in the fugue. We now get motive X, this time in 3 voices, an invertible counterpoint, and then we get an area where it's a little bit iffy of where we are. We're going to G, we're not really going to G, no, we're going to B. We land on B, the dominant of E minor. We get 1 fugal entry, a soloist, and then we get our arrival at the focal landing place. Then the music really feels like it's just somebody's grabbing the steering wheel, turning things around. There's this sense of unwinding, and that takes us to a soloist who alludes to B flat. We don't quite have a pedal, but we get B flat, and that takes us to, again, the subdominant. So now we're going to go 4-5-1 in A minor, just like we went 4-5-1 in E minor. So there's an extended passage on the subdominant 4, where motive X does its final grand finale, going frontwards and backwards in retrograde and invertible counterpoint. And then that takes us to the final dominant. What we didn't cover is there's a little pedal on the dominant, some more fugal entries that take us to the final tonic, a little show of bravura, and that's the end of the fugue. So I hope you found this helpful. I do hope that if you're working up this fugue, and that if you have watched the 3 videos, that it will really help you understand how all these different elements actually are really interrelated, in the sense that they hold up that structure, that they take us to that E minor chord, and then take us back to the home key. As always, feel free to comment below if you want to find out when new videos are uploaded. Just subscribe to the channel, turn on your notifications, or else you can also subscribe to our non-promotional newsletter at sonatasandpartitas.com.